Is it sharing the screen or sharing? What is it sharing right now?
Yeah, it's okay. You can.
Is it sharing the screen or sharing? What is it sharing right now?
Yeah, it's okay. You can.
How can I? Do you know how I can choose? I'll do something else. What is it sharing right now? Do that.
Yeah.
Try this window.
It's okay. You can share entire screen.
Do you know how I can choose? I'll do and then how can I go to that? Is it sharing the screen or still sharing the Google Meet window?
Share Google Meet. Enter your desktop window, and then you can show your PPT.
Is it sharing the screen or still? Yeah, it's just I'm having trouble to find where I can share.
Just you open your PPT. I think it is okay. Just you
yeah,
open
it's what I'm showing. Is it sharing
so,
yeah, it's just I'm having trouble to find where I can. Google Meet, I have to always trouble.
Probably you're more familiar with Zoom, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so now it should be sharing the Google Meet entire screen. So one sec. And
now it's present. Yeah, now it's okay. Okay.
Is it working? Okay, let's see.
Yes, perfect. Now it's perfect.
What about now? Is it?
Yeah. Full screen. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
I think I'm. Okay. Nothing is good. Okay, I can come back and try again. Okay, give me a sec. Hi. Is it working better?
Shubham? Shubham? Hello?
Hi. Is it working better? Sure. Yeah, there is the heater, and I'm worried that's the heater noise, so hopefully it will not go back on. But yeah, okay, let me share the screen.
Yeah, there is the heater, and I'm worried that's the heater noise. So
Oh shoot.
Yeah. So, Shubham, is it okay? Shall we start?
For me, yes. If you're asking
No,
me,
no,
yes.
no. Shubham. Okay. So now, uh, okay. Good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. Uh, as you know, today's talk is very interesting, and today we have Dr. Valerie Payré from University of Iowa. She's a planetary geologist. She's now teaching. They're in teaching position, assistant professor, Department of Earth and Environmental Science, and her expertise is mostly in sedimentology and igneous petrology. And she's now working on surface process and of an interior and internal process of Mars. She wants to, it's a core research area of planet Mars. She was a team member of Curiosity Ken Camp and Leaps team. She completed her undergraduate and postgraduate degree from France, when PhD from University de Lorraine from France also. She in her PhD she mostly did fantastic work on cane cam. Data. She used lithium, strontium, beryllium, barium, and copper to understand the Martian surface chemistry, the habitability. After that, she did a postdoc from Rice University and North Arizona University in different topics on Mars and other planets also. So, I welcome Dr. Payré for today's talk. And we are really very excited to listen for the felsic volcanism. That is today's topic. It's very interesting, I think. So now the stage is yours.
Thank you so much for this introduction and for inviting me. So I think there is someone that is not muted. I'm hearing some echo.
Shubham, can you please mute yourself?
Sorry.
Shubham, can you please mute? Oh,
Okay.
no, it's fine.
Yeah, now it's working. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, well, thank you so much again. Today I'll talk about Mars magmatism and how complex it is and how diverse the Martian crust is actually. Yeah. So, as you said before, I was part of the ChemCam team on board the Curiosity rover. And I have been working a lot on trace elements, which today I will not talk about that much, but I will more focus on the discovery from the Curiosity rover, but also on some last studies that show that on a global scale, we observe a really complex crust from orbital observation. So I often get that question, why studying Mars? So the Earth, most of its surface is pretty young. It's younger than 2 billion years old. So we have a window from our past on Earth that we don't really understand how the planet formed, what the first crust was made of, and how it evolved to plate tectonics and the continental and oceanic crust. We are not sure exactly how that happened and when. We are not sure also about when life appeared, if it was around 3.9 billion years ago or even before. But when looking at Mars, most of its surface, as shown on that picture here, especially the southern hemisphere, is actually extremely old, older than 3.5 billion years old. So when we go to Mars and we're studying that southern hemisphere, there is this window that we're missing on Earth, and studying Mars at that time can help us better understand our own planet and what it looked like 3.5 and before billion years ago. So to do that, we can use all the data set that we have from Mars, and what they are. We have orbital observations. So those are spacecraft, satellites that we send to Mars, and they're orbiting around the planets. And we can look at the mineralogy at the surface, the composition of the surface, and other information like atmospheric composition and things like that. We can image the surface of Mars at a global scale. The spatial resolution is between around 10 meters to several hundreds of kilometers. So orbital observations are great to have an idea of what is happening at a global scale. But if we want to know what is happening at a centimetric scale or even a meter scale, we cannot use them because it's too small to be observed by orbiters. So that's why we're sending those rovers and landers at the surface of Mars, because they can tell us about what is happening at a way smaller scale, from submillimeters to centimeter scale. We can do imaging at a really good resolution. We can do chemical analysis, mineralogical analysis, studying wind and things like that. And here I'm showing the Curiosity rover that I will talk a lot about today. And here is where the Curiosity rover landed in Gay Crater at the surface of Mars. So that's a 150-kilometer crater at the surface, and has been traveling since 2012. So it's been a while now. So we have those rovers, and we also have Martian meteorites. So those are rocks that are directly coming from Mars to Earth after an impact ejected those rocks to space and traveled up to Earth. So we receive Martian meteorites kind of everywhere on Earth, but it's easy to find them in the South Pole, in Antarctica, or in desert, like the Sahara Desert. And with Martian meteorites, what is great is that we can take them into our terrestrial lab and do any type of analysis we want. We can use mass spectrometers, we can use microprobe, just thin section, and things like that. So we can have analyses and images at a really high resolution from submicrons to centimeter scale. That is, of course, way better than what type of instrument a rover can have. We don't have like laser ICP-MS on board any rovers right now, because you need sample preparation, you need to be in contact with the rock, you need a lot of preparation that is not feasible on board a rover. So it's kind of complicated to have that type of rover at the surface of another planet. So having actual samples on Earth is really great for scientists understanding just magmatic processes from those. Unfortunately, those Martian meteorites are rare. Currently, we have around 200 Martian meteorites. It's good to know that meteorites by themselves, we have, I think, around 70,000 meteorites. So Martian meteorites are just a small proportion of that. And the other issue with that is they're extremely young, younger than 2.4 billion years old, while the surface of Mars is way older than that. So we have a sample bias, and most of them are coming from the same location, almost. So it's not really representative of the global scale of Mars. So when we study Mars, we need to look at all of those data sets to better understand at a global scale what is happening. So as an introduction for those who don't really know Mars, here I'm showing a little bit about the geological features that are really important for Mars. So on the left, you have a map of an elevation map of Mars with the southern hemisphere here with red colors. And red colors correspond to high elevation. So we have these high plateaus that are extremely craterized in the southern hemisphere. In the northern hemisphere, you have this blue color with almost no craters in there. Those are low elevation terrains. So low elevation, northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere being high elevation. On the right, I'm showing an age map of Mars. And the green and brown colors that you see in the southern hemisphere, as I showed before, correspond to terrains older than 3.7 billion years old. That's what we call Noachian, basically. So the southern hemisphere correspond to high plateau and are extremely old, and the northern hemisphere is a smooth lowlands with pretty young ages. So that's basically Mars with its dichotomy in topography that we observe from orbiters. So what I'm interested in is the Martian crust. I want to know whether it's indeed basaltic, as we thought forever since the last decade, and using all the data set we have from Mars. So I'll talk a lot about those alkali versus silica concentration diagrams to see the composition of the rock we obtain from rovers and Martian meteorites. So here I'm showing Martian meteorites where they plot in this task diagram is within that basaltic field. So basically, what you look at the silica concentration, they're pretty low. If I look at Mars exploration rover, like the Spirit rover, the Opportunity rover, when they found igneous rocks, they were plotting here. So again, with low silica concentration, maybe more alkali rich with more sodium and potassium, but still with low silica concentration. Looking at orbiters and what they're observing in terms of chemistry and mineralogy, again, the gamma ray spectrometer, which is able to look at the silica concentration, is showing that, again, the Martian crust, or at least the surface, is pretty low in silica concentration. We do have mineralogical data that might suggest a little bit more silica-rich surface, although it's still what we call mafic. It's, basically lower than 55% of silica concentration. So from those data set, it seems like the surface of Mars is basically basaltic with more or less alkali in it. So we thought for a long time that the crust on Mars was homogeneously basaltic all over. So if we do kind of a summary of Mars and the Earth, both have this topography dichotomy with the lowlands and the highlands on Mars, and on Earth we have the continental crust that is high plateau and the oceanic crust that correspond to low elevations. All the oldest rocks we have from Earth are located on continents like Australia, Canada, Russia, and Africa. So we have the oldest rocks from Archean that are on highlands, like on Mars. And of course, we know that water circulated in the past of the Earth with the ocean very early after the formation of the planet. And on Mars, we do have traces of rivers, lakes, maybe even seas at the surface of Mars in 3.5 billion years ago and even a little bit before. The big differences between those two planets is that there is no plate tectonic on Mars. On Earth, we know there is subduction, convergence zones with mountains and arcs and subarcs. On Mars, we don't have that. And that is why on Mars, most of the southern hemisphere is extremely old because there was no plate tectonic to erase them. On Earth, they have been subducted, deformed by plate tectonics, so we lost a lot of our past. The other big difference is that when you look at the continental crust and the oceanic crust on Earth, they're in chemically different. The continental crust is more andesitic, so silica rich, compared to the oceanic crust that is silica poor, like basaltic. On Mars, it seems that everything is pretty homogeneously basaltic, right? And finally, liquid water. Today, we're not sure about Mars. There might be, maybe in subsurface. At the surface, we're basically don't see anything, or at least the community is not agreeing on whether there is still liquid water today. And on Earth, of course, we have oceans, all over rivers, so still liquid water. So in this talk, I want to focus on that basaltic crust. Is it really homogeneous, or is it more looking like a dual chemical crust on Mars, like Earth? So I'm talking about this because we have found that Martian meteorites, it's called Black Beauty, in 2011. And if you look at the task diagram here with alkali silica concentration, all the rectangles correspond to igneous clast that we found inside that Martian meteorite. And as you can see, a lot of those rectangles are within the basaltic field, but we do have more silica-rich clasts in there. Especially this one, it's a monzonite with a trachytic composition. So it's an intrusive rock that we found. It's showed here that is really evolved in composition. So I just want to say that in this talk, I'll talk a lot about mafic composition. That's composition lower than 53% of silica concentration. When it's higher than that, I will talk about evolved rocks. And up to now, we thought basically everything was mafic. But now we found that meteorite that is showing that we do have evolved clast, igneous clast at the surface of Mars. How old are they? They are 4.47 billion years old. So that's basically a rock that we found from Mars that is older than any terrains that exist on Earth. It has been formed around 100 million years after the formation of the planets. And there was evolved magmatism at that time, since we found that igneous clast that is trachytic in composition. Now, if we look at isotopic analysis of zircon within that breccia, we found that actually the crust from which those clasts are might have been andesitic, so pretty evolved in composition. So that kind of questions whether the crust on Mars was just basaltic. It seems like very early on after its formation, within the 20 million years after the formation of the planet, maybe the crust was actually pretty evolved in composition, at least from which that meteorite is from. So it raised question about, well, is Mars having that homogeneously basaltic crust? Looking at geophysical data, like the geotopographic ratio and seismic data from InSight, both of these data sets are showing that the density of the crust have to be lower than 3.1. Looking at basalts from the Mars exploration rovers, from most of the Martian meteorites, the density of those rocks, of those basalts, is higher than 3.3. So we have a discrepancies here. And so we need a lighter crustal components below this mafic or basaltic surface that is lighter, that has to lower the density to 3.1. What could it be? Well, it could be felsic. When you have a felsic rock, it's lighter than a basaltic rock. So maybe we have this more evolved crustal component below the surface that is basaltic, as seen by orbiters. So that's kind of the question of this talk. Are there any evolved crustal component below the basaltic crust on Mars? So what I will talk about is what we found with the Curiosity rover and within these Martian meteorites, basically the diversity of these evolved rocks. Then I will go into how those evolved rocks could have formed using the rover observations and modeling. And finally, I'll look at what is happening at a more global scale, not just in Gay Crater where the Curiosity rover is, but at a global scale, is it something that we find elsewhere? Okay, so first, these Martian meteorites with these super evolved clasts here, what are they? Are they really igneous or are they something else? So it has been suggested that based on the trace elements, especially nickel, those igneous, those clasts here are actually pretty elevated in nickel. So here I'm showing a nickel magnesium plot with some rover data, most of Martian meteorites plotting here, and all the diamonds correspond to the Martian breccia clast that I'm talking about. And so what we see is that they are pretty elevated in nickel concentration. Nickel is not that elevated within a crust. Nickel is usually coming from asteroids that when they impact a planet, they will contaminate the planet with nickel and iron because usually they are iron nickel rich. And so the idea from, I think it was the Humayun et al. 2013 paper, is that because those clasts are nickel rich, it seems like they are corresponding to the crystallization of an impact melt. So an asteroid came in, impacted the surface of Mars, and melted a little bit around the impact to form those, what we thought was igneous clast. And so we had those basaltic clasts with a lot of nickel, those monzonitic clasts with a little bit less. So it's not very clear, but it seems like an impact is related to the formation of those pretty evolved clasts in the Martian meteorite. So Hewingsenthal in 2017 suggested that if you want to have that diversity of class from basaltic to monzonitic, you need to had, before the impact, the crust that was a mixture of a mafic and a felsic component. So you had an impact on that type of crust that would have created an impact melt sheet where you would have crystallization of orthopyroxene that would sink at the bottom of the magma chamber, or well, of the impact melt sheet, because they're heavy, and feldspar and quartz that are more lighter, that would float at the top of that impact melt sheet. So you would have kind of a stratification related to that impact, where you might have had orthopyroxene accumulate at the bottom, this noritic composition that we found in this class, and the monzonitic component that we found in the Martian breccia. So that's kind of the idea of how those clasts could have formed. But in any case, when we look at what happened before that impact, we did have a felsic component within the crust, within the basement, that was impacted before 4.47 billion years ago. So now I will talk about the rover observation from the Curiosity mission and the igneous rocks that we found there. So that is Curiosity rover. She landed in Gay crater, located here between the northern and the southern hemisphere, where the star is. We landed at the end of an alluvial fan. So from orbit, we could see that there was trace of a river coming from the northwestern rim with a pretty good catchment watershed. And we had an alluvial fan where we landed. So we had a lot of what we called float rocks. So those are rocks that are not on outcrops, but that were eroded from an outcrop within the crater rim or even the watershed and transported up to where we landed. So here I'm showing the rover route in yellow. So we landed in Bradbury landing site here, and then we traveled on the crater floor, and we are now ascending the Mount Sharp, which is basically the crater peak of the rover. So it's not showed here because we are finding a lot of sedimentary rocks, as you could expect. And what we found is, especially at the beginning of the travel of the Curiosity rover between the Kimberley Formation and the Bradbury landing site, we found a lot of those igneous float rocks hanging out around that route. So Gay crater is an impact crater. It was formed around 3.8 billion years ago. It was filled with water. It was a lake with rivers that were filling it up with water. And so we have a lot of sedimentary rocks, especially in the peak of the crater. So to study those rocks, we have several instruments on board the rover. And in this talk, I will focus on ChemCam and ChemIn. So ChemCam is basically the eye of the rover. It's located on the mat of the rover, and it has a laser-induced breakdown spectrometer, which we call LIBS. So this laser enabled to shoot at rocks that can be up to 7 meters away from the rover and analyze the composition of the rock. So when the laser is focusing on a rock, it will create a plasma. And the eye of the rover will receive the light of that plasma, and that emission light is transferred within the body of the rover by an optic fiber within spectrometers. So what we get out of it are emission spectra, as shown here with the intensity versus wavelength from the UV to the visible in the infrared. What you see here are peaks. One peak corresponds to one element, and the intensity of the peak is telling you about the concentration of that element. So with ChemCam and LIBS, we can analyze major, minor, and some trace elements in rocks that are pretty far away from the rover. No contact needed. What is really nice also with LIBS is that the size of the spot of the laser is between 300 to 500 microns. So that means if the grains are are bigger than 500, we can analyze that single grain and its composition. So that is very powerful when we are looking at phaneritic igneous rocks, for example. We can analyze the composition of an actual mineral, single mineral. So that's very cool. So then CAMIN is an X-ray diffractometer. So CAMIN is located within the body of the rover. So the Curiosity rover has that arm that will drill a hole inside a rock. I think it's a 2 centimeter deep hole, and the powder will be taken out of it and transferred into the body of the rover. And inside you have an X-ray diffractometer that can look at the mineralogy of it. What are the minerals in that powder? So a combination of the two is really powerful to understand the chemistry, but also the mineralogy of the rock. Okay, so this slide is showing the igneous rocks we found in Gale Crater. So again, that alkali versus silica concentration diagram with the same data I showed before, but this time I added with green dots here the composition of igneous rocks we found. And as you can see, it's not just basaltic, it's going up to trachytic composition and even dacitic composition. So those are pretty evolved rocks. They're felsic rocks, basically. And so I added pictures here of, for example, a trachyandesite. So this one here is called Harrison. We give name to the rock on Mars so that we know which one is what. But this trachyandesite is showing those really nice feldspar phenocrysts that you can see. There are centimetric feldspar crystals here, separated by a really dark matrix, fine grain. We found those trachyte that are sometimes pumice or effusive rocks, and we found those diorites with this dacitic and dacitic composition. That basically on Earth, diorites are what is making up our continental crust. So just by this data from the Curiosity rover, we can tell that we have a range of igneous rocks from mafic to felsic composition. They're extremely old. They're likely from the Gale Crater catchment watershed, so older than 3.7 billion years old. And the other thing that we can tell is that they are alkali rich, but also alkali poor. And those are just telling us that there were different magmatic processes that could have formed them. They cannot come from the same magmatic process at all. So just by looking at this data, we can tell that the magmatic diversity at the surface of Mars is happening. We have a complex magmatic activity, especially early on after the formation of the planet within the 500 million years after the solar system formation. And now the question is, how did these evolved rocks could have formed, especially in Gale Crater, where we know it's not related to an impact because the nickel concentration is pretty low. So to do that, we can use modeling. And so I've used the composition of the minerals to do that, and also the composition of these igneous rocks that we found in Gale Crater. So here I'm showing accumulate on the left. So it's, again, feldspar rich. So you have those really nice feldspar all over. They are centimetric. They are making 80% of the rock. So those type of rocks definitely point out to something that might be evolved, like a magma that was evolved that could have formed that. I'm showing on the right, again, this Harrison trachyandesite with these nice feldspar clasts. And so what is great with those type of rock is that the feldspar are really big. They're big crystal. So with LIBS, we can just analyze their composition without any mixture with the matrix or something else. So what we did is we looked at all the chem observation, all the composition analyzed by LIBS. And we know what a feldspar composition looked like based on its chemical formula. And so basically what we did is a filtering based on the stoichiometry of feldspar to find the composition that would match feldspar and pyroxene composition. And then we had data out of it, and we checked if the corresponding image indeed hit a feldspar mineral or a pyroxene mineral. So I will focus on feldspar in this talk, but that's what we got. So here is a ternary diagram of feldspar. The calcium end member is here, sodium end member here, and potassium end member here. All the colored dots that I'm showing correspond to the CAMIN data, the X-ray diffractometer data, and the white circles correspond to the ChemCam-LIBS data. So what we can see from that diagram is that we have a full range of feldspar from labradorite, which is calcium, sodium rich, to definitely potassium rich feldspar. So we have a full range following that line, which usually is related to just you have a magma, you do fractional crystallization, and you get the full range of feldspar from mafic magma to a more evolved one. And here, usually, you end up with a felsic magma. So the goal when we saw that was to understand how did these feldspar grains form? Were they from an evolved magma, especially those potassium-rich feldspar? So to understand that, we use what we call the MELTS software. So it's thermodynamical modeling that can model magmatic processes using a given starting composition. We can play with the pressure, with the temperature, with the oxygen fugacity, so the redox conditions of the environment, the water concentration. We can model crystallization, partial melting. Well, we can do a lot of things. So because we can do a lot of things, we thought that would be good to model something that we know pretty well is happening on Earth. So what we did is basically modeling a mid-ocean-rich basalt formation. So we had basically a mantle composition that we know from Mars that would go do an isentropic melting, so an adiabatic ascent following an adiabat. And when it reaches the solidus, it will start melting. And as it goes up to erupt, basically, it will melt more and more. And so what we did is taking melts that were formed that way from various degree of partial melting and did fractional crystallization at crustal depths. So we did various pressure, various water concentration, various redox conditions. Basically, we model what is happening pretty commonly on Earth. So that's what we obtain. So here I'm showing again the same diagram as before. We are looking at the line correspond to the fractional crystallization model with in blue and red 2 different models. And I can tell you that after a bunch of models that I did, no model could reach the composition of all the feldspar range that we found in Gate Crater. We need 2 different magmas. We need one magma that is in low alkali concentration that could form those plagioclase, and one that is more evolved in composition, more alkali-rich, that can form those alkali feldspar. So we need those 2 crystallization sequences, basically. And now the question is, how about igneous rocks? Are they matching the composition of igneous rocks in the crater? So that's that, again, task diagram here. So there's a lot going on, but I'll go through it a little bit. So the lines correspond to the models that have been done. But behind, you can see some gray areas here and here that correspond to the igneous rocks that we found in Gate Crater. The plagioclase with low alkali magma from which they crystallize formed from those yellowish, greenish colors, so here, which actually match the composition of igneous rocks we found in Gate Crater with low alkali concentration. The alkali-rich feldspar were formed from a more trachytic melt, so again, matching those felsic rocks that are more alkali-rich in Gate Crater. So from that type of models, we could tell that basically we had 2 different magmas that could form the whole mineralogical assemblage and the composition of igneous rocks in Gate Crater. We had a magma that was alkali-rich and a magma that was alkali-poor. So fractional crystallization can explain that. So in kind of summary, but also going further, fractional crystallization is a process that could have led to the formation of evolved rocks. It has been shown a little bit later that crustal assimilation is also something that commonly happen on Earth, and it for sure happen on Mars too. And it could also explain, with the combination of fractional crystallization, that range of composition in Gay Crater. There are other hypotheses like mantle metasomatism, so that could explain the alkali-rich igneous rocks that we found in Gay Crater. So that would be a mantle reservoir that is different from other mantle part, let's say. And the other idea is that maybe the alkali-poor igneous rocks were formed by melting the base of the crust. So that's something that is happening on Earth, so why not on Mars? So we don't really know. I cannot tell you which one is the good one. We need more data. We need Mars sample return to happen to analyze them in the lab. But now the question is, are these processes localized or not? So here I'm showing the same map as before with the age on green and brown, meaning Noachian. And I'm showing in yellow here a region that we found to be potassium and thorium rich from spacecraft observation, orbital observation. So it was interesting to understand what this region was made of. Is it because it's potassium and thorium rich because of evolved magmas that was in there, or is it related to more weathering processes? In addition to that, looking at magnetic data, it seems like there is a lot of magnetic anomalies in that region. And so that was kind of a question of what is this? What is this Terra Sirenum Cimmeria region with these geochemical and magnetic anomalies? It is extremely old, older than 4.2 billion years old. And so the question is that region an evolved remnant of one of the oldest crustal components? So I have looked at this region with some colleagues to understand that. And so to look at that, we can use visible near-infrared spectroscopy. So that corresponds to orbital observation from the compact reconnaissance imager spectrometer for Mars, so CRISM, and it has this visible near-infrared spectrometer. So here I'm showing a lab spectra, so in the lab, not on Mars, with the reflectance versus the wavelength. That corresponds to what we obtain on from Mars. This is from Rogers and Negvazil paper in 2015. What they're showing is that for feldspar, if we observe feldspar on Mars, we would have this what we call absorption band, meaning the decrease of the reflectance that is centered at specifically 1.25 micron. That's very specific of feldspar. So if we observe that absorption band at 1.25 micron, that means we have a plagioclase or feldspar. Now, if I'm adding some mafic mineral like ojite, for example, in the mixture, in the lab, what you can see is that if you have 15% of ojite in the mixture, this absorption band is decreasing. And if you're adding more ojite, it's decreasing more and more until you cannot see that plagioclase absorption band at 1.25 microns anymore. So at the end, if we observe feldspar, if we observe that absorption band at 1.25 micron on Mars, that means we do have a lot of feldspar in there. More than 60% of the terrains have to be feldspar. So observing that with CRISM could tell us that maybe we have a feldspar accumulate or a feldspar-rich rock that could be from an evolved magma on Mars. So here I'm showing CRISM results. So the blue spectra correspond to the CRISM data, so the orbital observation, and the white here spectra at the bottom correspond to feldspar and member that were measured in the lab. So what you can see with these blue spectra is that you do have that absorption band at 1.25 microns for all of them here that correspond to that feldspar detection. The other thing you can tell is that it's very noisy. Well, it's not as if we're in a lab in a very controlled region. And also you can see that the absorption band is not always very deep. as we would expect for feldspar. So that could be due to grain size. That could be due to not a lot of feldspar compared to the amount of mafic minerals. So that could be due to many things. But in any case, what you see is that there is this 1.25 micron absorption band happening. Where are we seeing that? All the stars on that map is showing where we found those feldspar-rich terrains on Mars. So there are kind of a lot. We have several hundreds of detections, especially also in that Terra Sirenum, Terra Cimmeria region. You can also see that Gale crater is actually located here, so within that Terra Cimmeria region that is potassium thorium rich. So there is something happening in there with this region in terms of the magmatic evolution. So now the question is, are these feldspar-rich terrains similar to what we observe in Gale crater, like this trachyandesite that I showed earlier? Is it looking like that? Is it an evolved rock? Is it a mafic rock? To understand that, we can look at this time thermal infrared spectroscopy. So now we're looking at emission spectra, not reflectance, and we can observe that with another orbital instrument that is called THEMIS. So here I'm showing an example of the emissivity versus the wavelength of what we are going to see. What you have to look at is the location of that absorption center. So here for basalts, it's located at 10.2 micron. If you see that absorption center is shifted to the left, that means you have a silica-rich rock, so a more evolved composition. If you see that absorption center is shifted to the right, that means you have a more mafic composition. So that's what I'm showing here with the location of the the absorption center for a different type of materials. So an olivine, which is silica pore, and a quartz, which is basically SiO2. And what you can see is that when you have an olivine silica pore, the absorption center is at longer wavelength compared to quartz and other evolved rocks that have a lot of silica, and their absorption center is going to shorter wavelength. So what are we observing for these feldspar-rich terrains? What is the location of that absorption center? So that's the data we obtain. So as you can see, your absorption center is going from around 10.1 to 9.6 micron. That corresponds to that region, which is between mafic and felsic rocks. That's what we call intermediate rocks. They could be andesitic, they could be trachyandesitic. I cannot tell you the alkali concentration. We do not have them from orbit. What I can tell you is that these feldspar-rich rocks are evolved in composition. What are they? So we found some at the central peak of craters. So I'm showing here all the white region correspond to those feldspar-rich rocks. We found them at the top and edges of eroded blocks. So again, whitish materials all over here. We found them as ejectors with pile of feldspar-rich signals here, and on the rim of crater, so as located, for example, here. So basically, you can tell that we found them in crater rim, eroded blocks, in central peak, in ejectors. Those are excavated terrains. They are not at the surface. They are excavated by impacts, by erosion, by fluvial activities. So they're extremely old crystal materials that are older than the surface, older than 4 billion years old. So from those observations, we can tell that we have feldspar-rich evolved rocks scattered in Noachian terrains, in really old terrains. So it seems like we do have an evolved crystal component existing below the mafic surface of Mars. So to just summarize everything from this talk is that we found those alkali-rich, alkali-poor, felsic, and evolved rocks in Gale crater. We found those evolved rocks scattered in extremely ancient terrains, especially within the Terra Sirenum Cimmeria region. And it seems that they do witness this more evolved crystal component that is below the mafic surface that we found from orbiters. And that is actually consistent with geophysical and seismic data. Now, how could that happen? How did they form? Are they sampling the primary crust, the crust that was extracted from the magma ocean really early after the formation of the planet? Are they sampling a secondary crust that has been modified by volcanism and maybe mantle plume and things like that? I don't know. And we cannot tell from that. We need more models. We need future mission. We need the Mars sample return mission to get some of those very ancient igneous samples that are evolved in composition and go to our terrestrial lab, do any analysis we want, but especially the rare earth elements and trace elements that we cannot analyze on Mars. We need to have an idea of the regional scale of those evolved components that we saw in the southern hemisphere. So we need a helicopter on Mars. So right now the Mars sample return is ongoing. So this is related to the Perseverance rover. So the Perseverance rover is drilling a bunch of sample from Mars and putting them in a sample tube. And the goal is that in 2029, there will be a mission launching to Mars to get those samples back. So we would have a platform. The Perseverance rover would have the samples that were drilled to the platform, and then a rocket will send those samples to a spacecraft. That spacecraft will come back to Earth. So a lot of steps there. Hopefully will happen, but we should have some of the samples from Mars in 2033 in our Earth-based labs, and that would be amazing. Now we're proposing also with friends in the US a mission concept that hopefully will be selected. And the idea is to have a helicopter that would analyze the surface of Mars with a visible and infrared spectrometer, like a CRISM, if you want, doing some imaging. And when it finds some maybe feldspar-rich sample and outcrop, the helicopter will land, and we would have a microLIBS on the bottom of that helicopter. And that would analyze at a 50 micron scale, so very small laser spot on a 10 by 10 grid, so 100 analyses to map the feldspar-rich rock. So that will enable us to analyze single grain, single minerals, and maybe look at rare earth elements as microLIBS have proven on Earth possible. So that would definitely help us to better understand those feldspar-rich rocks, how they formed, when, and so that would be definitely a significant improvement in the accuracy, but also in the rapidity of the analysis compared to ChemCam or SuperCam on board the Perseverance rover. So with that, I will thank you for your attention. And also I wanted to highlight that all these rover data are publicly accessible online. So feel free to scan that QR code. I will lead you to that, what we call the PDS page with the SuperCam, ChemCam data, and even images. So you can take a look at them. It's very fun to go through. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Payré, for this excellent presentation. It's really, really, really good. Yeah, super work, I must say. And we have a few questions or some thing that is you talk about something that is the mantle was evolved in early time, means early history. I think in Noachian period. But what happened after that? Means after Noachian, Hesperian, or at that time, was that evolution stopped, or what happened? Means earlier we are getting felsic or that kind of material, but later we are getting only basaltic. So, what could be the reason?
So yeah, that's a really good question. So I don't know if I have the map. Oh, here. So actually, after Noachian, we found at Syrtis Major Planum, so that's a really big volcanic province, and we found on the top of it there is a caldera, and in that caldera we can look at lava flows with CRISM and also with Themis. And what we saw is that there are like felsic lava flows happening, and they are from Hesperian. So they are, I think, around 3 or 3.2 billion years old. So it means that there were still some, evolved magmatism happening in Hesperian. But most of what we found, and from Martian meteorites that are extremely young, they are mostly mafic basaltic gabbros, like these more mafic rocks, and less of felsic compositions. So it seems like in Noachian there was that huge diversity of that kind of disappear afterwards.
Okay, so we have a few more questions. I think you can also see your
Yeah,
chat window.
I'm looking at them.
Saijpal Singh asked one question. What's the difference in the composition of Mars surface? The rusty color surface bright and the darker regions.
So that's a really good question. So the dark and red colors are actually related to the amount of sand happening at the surface. So you can see those really dark region, and those are actually where we found a lot of dunes on Mars. So the dunes there are a bunch of dunes like desert, and we find them kind of at some location, and they are moving. We have a lot of wind currently on Mars. That's the activity of Mars, the wind. And so they are moving around. So actually, if you look at those dark spots, they are moving with time after a few seasons or a few months. So those dunes are basaltic in composition, a lot of olivine in there, some pyroxene, not a lot of feldspar. It's mostly pretty basaltic, basically. And the reddish region corresponds to the bedrock, so the actual rock that we are analyzing with the Curiosity rover, for example. And so they could be anything. They could be clay, they could be basaltic, they could be, I cannot tell you because there is so much diversity. But the difference in
But it's
color
only
is
surface one. But if you drill that one, then you can get a different kind of rock.
yeah, exactly.
Gray.
Yeah, if you drill, it's actually grayish. Yeah, so
Hmm.
it's kind of oxidized at the surface.
Yes.
But there are so different type of rock on Mars that it's hard to tell what they are. But the color difference is actually related to the type of material. The red corresponds to bedrock, and the dark corresponds to dunes. So that's the difference of it.
Next question, Gaurav Kokandkar. He asked, as we know on Earth, on Earth, the basalt of Archean age is having higher percentage of Mg and Fe as compared to recent.
So on Mars, same kind of variation is present on Mars. So in terms of iron concentration, no. There are still the rocks we analyze in Gate Crater, and even the Martian meteorites that have those evolved clasts. The composition of iron is pretty high, and as high as Martian meteorites that are way younger, that are 500 million years old. They're also having a lot of iron in there. The magnesium composition is varying, but there is no clear evolution. But there is still so these Martian meteorites that are pretty young, they are coming from a recent region, likely the Tharsis region. And so that's a huge basaltic volcano that erupted for a long time, actually, but also where there were recent activities. And we do find similar signatures as older rocks, which is interesting in terms of the chemistry. So iron, magnesium, the magnesium number is kind of similar, which might show that there was the potential temperature, the temperature of the mantle might have been kind of similar at that location as it was in early Mars, which is counterintuitive, kind of, as you think the planet will cool down. But yeah, so not really variation in iron and magnesium, but I mean, we don't have a lot of samples to see that, really. So that's why we would need more Martian meteorites, more samples from Mars to see if there is any of this type of evolution. It's more about silica concentration, where there is definitely some evolution.
But Black Beauty, I think that is much older, dated 4.6. What is that? Brexia, I think. It's a common one.
Yeah.
So next question, Deepayan Dasgupta asks, thank you for Is possible to detect signature of shock metamorphism in feldspar grain using rover spectroscopic data? I think.
I love that question. I actually am working on this. So, I mean, like from rover data, with a curiosity rover, it's not possible for sure. Because we don't, with LIBS, we cannot see that. LIBS is looking at the chemistry. We could see that from spectral data, like visible in infrared spectroscopy. It's possible to see those features, but there is not a lot of study on that topic, actually. And so we need more data in the lab to see the differences between an impacted feldspar grain and a non-impacted feldspar grain, and how those absorptions are shifted depending on the pressure of the impact and things like that. So right now we cannot tell, but hopefully in the future we will be able to with an actual database. Yeah.
Deepan, are you working on this? Any analog study? We have in India we have lunar crater, and lunar it's a impact crater on a basaltic surface. Okay, Deccan basalt, and there we have several this kind of structure. So I think Deepan is working.
Yeah, definitely we need
Definitely interested. Yeah, definitely interested. Thank you so much. Yeah, wonderful presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, next question, Sinchan Bhattacharya. The presence of sedimentary basin indicated the presence of tectonic activity. No, not that. Presence of sedimentary basin indicate the presence of tectonic activity which create the gradient. What could be the reason that close the cycle? Okay. Sinchan, I think presence of sedimentary basin is actually no, it is not like that. So in Mars actually have a crater impact crater related sedimentary basin. It's not like our convergent or divergent sedimentary kind of basin. So they are a bit different, okay, compared to Earth. So I think Dr. Payré, the best person to talk about this.
Yeah, so on Mars, yeah, tectonic is hot is you have to be careful on what you call tectonic. On Earth, we know plate tectonic. On Mars, if you say tectonic, people will go crazy. So I think what you mean is movements, like kind of movement. So on Mars, basically, there have been faulting related to the Tharsis bulge, actually, that created the Valles Marineris region. And so you have those faults, you have impacts. Those are what create basins on Mars. So here, for example, you have the Hellas Basin, and that's related to an impact, and that's have been, I'm pretty sure, sea a long time ago. So there have been, this type of activities that created like water basins, lakes, and rivers due to that. Now, what could be the reason that closed the cycle? So I'm not sure what is meant by that, but on Mars, there are a lot of impacts craters that were filled with water, creating a lake. Usually, those lakes were closed, meaning that you got river in, but the water was not going out by through another river. It does happen in Jezero Crater, though. So Jezero Crater, where the Perseverance rover is right now, was an open lake. So there was water in and water out. So what happened is we think that just at one point you didn't have the atmosphere protecting all that water. You had solar wind that just blew everything away, and so you had the water loss through evaporation, and then all the hydrogen molecules that were, many of them, escaping to space. So that's more related to the fact that the atmosphere was not there anymore, because the dynamo, for example, the magnetic field of the planet just stopped, because it's a small planet. So it cooled down very rapidly. So you're expecting the dynamo just stopping very early after the formation of the planet. So you might not have had a lot of water being able to stay on the ground, being stable, because you would have the atmosphere not protecting it anymore. So that's why you would have evaporation. Now we have a lot of salts, like sulfates, at the surface of Mars that are very characteristic of what we call the Amazonian time. So that's between 3 billion years ago to today. So that's basically why sedimentary activity stopped on Mars at one point.
Yeah. So the next question from Christian Iowa. From a biological perspective, how does the Martian mineralogy correlate the speculative life form with special reference to the Allen Hill Martian rock microbial fossil?
Yeah, so that's a tough question. So Allen Hills, we thought that there might be traces of life in there due to magnetite that were in a specific shape that remind people of some bacteria that would basically form those. It has been shown that it's actually possible without life. Now, I think what you're asking is whether like we found some characteristic in terms of the geochemistry on Mars that could be related to life. We did find some magnetite that's not uncommon. The thing is, we didn't find those shapes at all from Martian meteorites. Like with rovers, we cannot see at that high resolution what is happening at a micron scale. So I don't know what type of magnetite it was. But we did find those manganese oxides in Gale crater, but also in Jezero crater. It's happening too. And manganese oxide, usually we find them at the bottom of the seafloor on Earth, and they're related to life. The thing is, you can also form them without life being involved. So it's kind of frustrating because you find some characteristic that could be life related, but they might. I mean, it's possible also to form them differently. But what is interesting is that we have phosphorus, we have carbon, we have oxygen, of course, hydrogen, nitrogen, and we find all those trace elements in high concentration like copper. There might be some lead, nickel, chromium, manganese. All those elements are really important for life and for just like the development of bacteria or microbe. So it's definitely possible that those were useful for a kind of beginning of life at one point, but we haven't found clear evidence of that happening. So it's still, up in the air, I guess.
Okay. Next question from Sinchan again. Is the FPMG isotope composition of basalt differ from those in Earth basalt? Yes, I think.
So for that, I don't know. So I invite you to look at publication related to that because I have no idea. Iron and magnesium isotopic compositions are actually new things. So I hope people have been looking at this, and silica isotopic composition would be also interesting to look at. But I actually have no idea, so I don't want to say something wrong here.
Sinchan, you can read some paper on Martian meteorite. Okay. I think people have done these isotopes. Maybe, I'm not sure also, but maybe. We may get some data of Fe and Mg.
Yeah.
But definitely Nobel gas and other isotope, oxygen isotope, they have difference on Earth and Mars.
Yeah, oxygen for sure. Yeah.
The next, Nirmala Chatterjee, without prior knowledge of Martian composition, how would we understand the SNC meteorite came from Mars?
So there are several methods. A really old one. The first time, so we had a bunch of meteorites, and we found this group that was having a different composition than most of the others. And we're like, where are they coming from? I'm talking about the 60s, 50s, so a long time ago. And we sent those Viking landers to Mars, and these Viking landers told us about the composition of the atmosphere of Mars. So we could measure the isotopic concentration of the atmosphere, like xenon, neon, extra, that was very specific to Mars due to the atmosphere escape. And so looking at these these meteorites that were not within any group of others, looking at bubbles within them that would have the atmosphere of Mars, and comparing this atmosphere composition with the Viking landers' atmosphere composition, show that they are the same, like one to one line, exactly the same composition. So that's how we knew that those meteorites were actually Martian. Now, we don't do that anymore because it's actually time consuming to look at those isotopic composition. So we look at the iron and manganese ratio now. Now we know that Mars have this iron manganese ratio that is very specific, very different from Earth, from the Moon, and others. So just looking at those ratio can tell us about whether it's Martian or not.
Okay, and Chatterjee has a good question. In Mars, is Mars volcanically active? And what may be the reason of large volcanoes on Mars, like Olympus Mons?
Really good question there. So Mars volcanically active, we don't know, but InSight mission, they had this seismic station on Mars, the first ever that worked at the surface of Mars. Unfortunately, died I think it's a year ago or so. But this InSight lander of the seismic station recorded some what we call Marsquake, so earthquake, but for Mars. And it was, I think, magnitude 4.3 or 4.6, something around there. And it was actually coming from, I think, the Tharsis region. It was coming from a huge volcanic province on Mars. I think it was the Tharsis region, not sure, but I think it's from there. And it could be just an impact that could create a Marsquake. But in that study, they're showing that actually could be related to some lavas that would go up without erupting. So it would still be stuck within the crust, but just by that magma coming up, it would have created some stress, and so an Marsquake that would happen resulting from that. So it's based on modeling. So we're still unsure because there is no eruption that we have seen from Mars and we are imaging it every single day. So we would see if there is an eruption, we would see differences like a lava flow or, even a little ash plume or something. We would see it from orbital images. We are not seeing that. So we're not sure, but if it did happen or still active, it would be under the surface, like within the crust. So that's what we think is happening. Now, the second question was what may be the reason for large volcanoes on Mars? That's related to mantle plume. So you had, like in Hawaii, you had a huge mantle plume coming from the mantle, even maybe at the border with the core, that would just go up and you would melt some part of the crust and you would create those huge volcanic province on Mars by this type of activities. So it's mantle plume on Mars. It's not related to subduction or plate tectonics like on Earth, but those huge bulges are related to that. And they're pretty recent, so that's why we still see them today, because they're not old and they were not eroded by any fluvial activities. So we're still seeing them today.
Okay, thank you for your question. If anyone wants to ask any question, you can unmute and ask, no issue. And I think Dr. Shubham Sarkar have some question, and we can wait. Shubham, if you have any questions? Okay, I think that's all. You can. Hi.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Shubham did
Yeah.
his PhD from Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, and
Okay.
now currently in Physical Research Laboratory doing his postdoc there. His expertise also in that hyperspectral remote sensing, that all these VNIR spectroscopy, then Martian analog study, this kind. Uh,
Yeah, that's
Anyway.
great. We need all those data to understand Mars. So it's good to look at different perspectives. And what is nice is with the Perseverance rover, we have both this visible and infrared on board, but also from CRISM. So it's really nice to even compare what we're observing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's great. Exciting. Well, if you have a paper coming up from that work, let me know. I would be happy to read it.
Okay, thank you very much for joining this session. So I think Shubham, we can now close it. Okay. Thanks, Valerie. And you just wait for 5 minutes more. Okay, I'm just
Okay,
closing the
of course.
stream. Just